was 1979, the end of a decade where the world was modernizing quickly. The sounds of disco and dance music were gaining momentum, and music with electronic foundations was starting to take over the airwaves. Donna Summer, Blondie, Kraftwerk, and Boney M were making hit music with synthesizer and drum machine sequencers. Japan's Roland Corporation was fresh off the success of its first polysynth, the Jupiter-8. The Jupiter-8 was a 4-oscillator polysynth that enabled 4 notes or chords to be played at the same time with common wave shaping and filter controls. An instant hit, the Jupiter-8 was popularized by up-and-coming bands such as Depeche Mode, Soft Cell, and Duran Duran, which were forming a new wave sound for a new decade. At the same time, the sequential circuit's Prophet 5 was incredibly popular, offering 5-note polyphony and patch memory all in a slick package that was hugely popular with pro musicians in all genres of music. The price tag of $4,000 for a Prophet 5 did not seem to hurt its market share in any way, and sequential could not make units fast enough. Oberheim had also entered the polysynth market with the relatively compact OBX, where voice cards could be added to the bass module, increasing the polyphony from as low as 2 voices to as many as 8. To compete with the competition, Roland needed an 8-voice polysynth, and it was clear that the winning combination in the marketplace would have many features such as an arpeggiator, patch memory, multiple wave shaping options, split keyboard functionality, and stable tuning. Retail cost wasn't to be a limiting factor, as the synth was to be aimed at the professional keyboardist market. This was a dream project for Roland's engineers, who went to work leveraging the technology they had learned from their previous designs with the Jupiter-4 and new designs and improvements they'd been working on. The Jupiter-8 shared many common components with the Jupiter-4, such as the IR3109 filter IC, but Roland incorporated 2 new ICs into the Jupiter-8, its BA662 VCA and the IR3R01 envelope generator. Both of these ICs went on to production in other Roland synths of the era, such as the Juno 60 and the TB303. The 16 VCOs in the Roland Jupiter-8 were designed using mostly discrete components centered around the CA3046 transistor array and temperature control via the TSP-102J temperature sensing posistor. Needless to say, the circuitry involved to create the oscillator sections was bulky, causing the 4 voice boards inside the synth to be stacked on hinges in pairs of 2. Jupiter-8 engineer Kazuhisa Takahashi recalls the sheer scale of the synth design to be very challenging. Because of the multi-layers of circuit boards and all of the manual adjustments necessary, it was a lot of work to calibrate each unit. The main CPU for the Jupiter-8 was the very common workhorse 8-bit Zilog Z80 CPU, as found in many personal computers of the late 70s, such as the Tandy TRS-80. The Z80 handled the key scanning circuitry along with managing the patch storage and recall from RAM. The Jupiter-8's DAC for note scaling was a 12-bit AM6012. Although adequate, the resolution this provided for CV keyboard decoding was not sufficient and proved to add to the tuning issues the early models encountered. The Jupiter-8 was finally ready for sale in July of 1981, and needless to say, it was an instant success. The original July '81 release advertisement on the inside cover of Keyboard magazine contained a stunning picture of the monster synth, with rows and rows of text describing all of the many features, all with neon callouts. The multicolored buttons and orange on black silk screening was stunning. And the sound, it was huge. 16 oscillators could all be stacked up for monstrous leads. Or other patches showcasing Roland's lush trademark pad sounds were mind-blowing. Despite its steep $5,300 US price tag, the Jupiter-8 was back-ordered and units were hard to come by. Adopted by professional keyboardists all over the world, the Jupiter-8 quickly showed itself on the stages and in the music videos of many artists taking music into the next decade. Check out Howard Jones using the Jupiter-8 on his debut album, Human's Lift. In April of '82, less than a year after its initial release, the first major revision to the Jupiter-8 came with an upgrade to the interface board to support a 14-bit D-to-A converter. This significantly improved the tuning and pitch resolution on the keyboard. The following March of 1983, Roland's DCB digital control bus interface was added to all Jupiter-8s, now officially known as the JP-8A. DCB was Roland's proprietary predecessor to MIDI and enabled the Jupiter-8 to connect to the few other DCB products they had at the time, such as the MSQ700, JSQ60, Juno 60, and OP8. Interestingly enough, upon its release, DCB was already obsolete, as Roland had been working on the new MIDI protocol with Sequential prior to this release, and planned to replace DCB with MIDI on all future synth models. To make things right, in September of '83, Roland offered a conversion box, the MD8, which converted MIDI data to DCB, such that a DCB-equipped JP-8A could connect to other synthesizers with the new modern MIDI standard. For the 4 years between 1981 and 1985, the Jupiter-8 owned the pop music scene. Check out the Jupiter-8 in action here with Howard Jones, Duran Duran, Naked Eyes, and Ministry. In 1984, Roland released the MKS-80. This was the MIDI rack version called the Super Jupiter. Despite its name and similar programming features, the MKS-80 is actually more akin to the Jupiter-6, sharing an identical module board populated with 8 voices instead of 6. Differing from the Jupiter-8 keyboard version, this uses the 3340 VCO. The final run of the Jupiter-8s left the production line in late 1984. Although the demand was still high, Roland's motto of "We design the future" pushed the company in other directions. One, to create synthesizers with a sleeker knobless design, digital oscillator control, and a lower production cost. Roland's new JX8P and JX10 synths offered a much improved MIDI implementation and still delivered on the big, lush Roland sound with a sleeker, more cost-effective look. Analog synths were on the way out, and new technologies such as computers running software sequencers, sampling, and all digital synths were on the horizon. By the late 1980s, it was rare to see the once great synth in a keyboard rig. Many JP-8s found their way into the closets and storage rooms of studios and slowly started creeping onto the used market. It was in the early 90s when I found my Jupiter-8 for sale for $400 in a garage in a northern suburb of Seattle. It had been sitting in its case for years and definitely needed some TLC. What a find. Throughout the next decade, the legend of the Jupiter-8 was still larger than ever, however, and despite its size and the lacking of digital control features, many users still marveled at the lush sounds it created. Small companies such as Encore Electronics started providing MIDI upgrades for the Jupiter-8, a tantalizing way to bring the beast back to work in a new modern MIDI studio. Fast forwarding 40 years since the Jupiter-8 was released, the synth world has come full circle. Companies are releasing clones of vintage synths, based on original circuit designs, and collectors are asking upwards of $20,000 for a vintage Jupiter-8. Roland has released several modern Jupiter products, such as the mini-sized JP-08 boutique recreation of the original and the new Jupiter-X line of synths with similar stylings. None of these, however, compare to the legend that is the original Jupiter-8. As if the planets were aligning, it was created during a time when synthesizers were defining all new genres of music, and it was a synth that was designed with no expense spared, with an impeccable build quality. My thanks to the Roland engineers for building the synth of their dreams. The Jupiter-8 will forever be one of the grandest of all vintage synthesizers.